This episode is brought to you by Mojo. Performance-enhancing services make people faster, smarter, and more effective as human beings. And Mojo is the world's most powerful. With Mojo, you can plan out your next move, tackle your next challenge, and accomplish your next goal. That's why people that use Mojo are in better shape, make more money, and have better relationships. And teams that use Mojo have higher performance, better cultures, and more talented people. So if you want to optimize your performance and well-being in 2022, try out Mojo risk-free at joinmojo.com. That's 14 days absolutely free at joinmojo.com.
Well, hello, everybody. This is David Naylor. I have Sean Johnson here with me on the Motivational Intelligence Podcast. We have a phenomenal guest today. Storied career and very, very impressive track record. So we have Dick Mucci with us today. Now, Dick is a gentleman who native to the Boston area. He has held executive roles at MassMutual, at the Hartford. He was the chairman and CEO of New York Life's International Division, and most recently was the president of Lincoln Financial's group protection business. He is a gentleman who has really made his career to no small extent in turning around operations and making them even more successful when they came in. So very neat conversation I think we've got scheduled today. So welcome, Dick. We're pleased to have you with us.
Well, thank you, Dave, and thank you for the very nice introduction. I'm glad I wrote that one. No, thank you for the nice introduction. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're very welcome.
And Sean, nice to see you as well.
Pleasure. I'm excited.
So Dick, I did a little bit of your background and the different roles and things that you've had, but you haven't always held the big executive jobs and presidents and CEO, chairman positions and things. In fact, I know in one of our previous conversations, you mentioned that early on in your life, at one point, you had worked in a plastics factory. You had been a garbage man in downtown Boston. I think you said you were dumping pails in downtown Boston. And so, I'm kind of curious, those early positions you had before you started out on the business pathway, how did those shape who you ultimately became as a business executive?
Well, that's an interesting question. I didn't put the trash trucks on my resume. Well, my whole point is that I grew up in a blue-collar family. We didn't have a lot of money, so I needed to work. I needed to pay my way to school. So I was hungry for, have a little extra money in my pocket as well as to pay my expenses. So it always motivated me to work hard. And then the other aspect I think I mentioned to you in a previous discussion, my father was a very hardworking individual. So I kind of learned the work ethic from him. So I did do a number of different things, working my way through school. And so I think, really, you learn something from every experience in life. And I call myself an observer. I observe a lot about an experience. I just don't live it. I observe what's happening and how people behave, how they act, how they relate to one another, the whole employment situation. So I thought it was a great learning experience. You learn about different people, different situations, different environments. And it really colored my thinking. And emptying trash barrels in the city of Boston made me convinced that I didn't want to do that for a living. I'm going to study even harder so I didn't have to do that. And the interesting about that, it was a union type of occupation. So the guys that were there 10 years were making basically the same amount I was making. So I said, well, this is not a meritocracy. So I was much more motivated to get into an environment where, you were rewarded for the value you brought versus just, being there. So that certainly shaped me. And I think I mentioned to you, part of I think for 4 or 5 years, I actually drove an ice cream truck when I was in college. And actually it was a business. You would lease the truck, you would buy the ice cream wholesale, they give you a route, you take it around and sell it retail. And it was kind of an interesting job. You dealt with a lot of kids and they were mostly fun, except when they started rocking the truck when I was in there. But
they really wanted some ice cream.
I really did. I got hungry, but it did taught me about how to run a business. Some things you got to think about. My first venture into like an entrepreneurial situation. So that's an example which really shaped my thinking. In addition, normal things you get out of experience like that, you learn different aspects of running a business, what it took to run a business and so forth. So I think, like I said, I think every experience I try to learn from, I love to learn. So as being, part of that observation, part of it is always looking for opportunities to learn. Because I think you can learn from everything you do. And I'm learning now, even though I'm retired from full-time work, I still learn and I love to learn.
So I'm curious, maybe it's just the entrepreneur in me, but the ice cream truck business, I'm curious about how did you get into that? How did you find out about that opportunity? And then was it something you had to scrape together money up front to be able to lease the truck and the region? It was like kind of a franchise situation. How did you kind of
it was kind of interesting. Well, I had my uncle at that time, he was doing maintenance on trucks at a company called Hood, which was a big ice cream, but mostly milk manufacturer distributor in the Boston area, right in Boston, actually. And then they had a affiliate where they had these ice cream trucks, and he said, I was looking for work. Someone said, you should look into that. I hear it's a really good way to make money, and it's a business, blah blah blah. So they were typically, some people were older and full time, but most of them were people like me, college students looking for something to do in the summer. So they made it pretty easy. You signed a leasing agreement, and you didn't have to put any money in front other than buying the ice cream wholesale. I think you had to put some security deposit down, as I recall, not a lot. And every morning go there, and you buy the ice cream wholesale. You load the truck, and they lease the truck per diem. And they had a holdback. So in other words, every dollar ice cream you bought, they held back 15 cents. You got it at the end, so you can. If you return the truck without damage, you get it back. So that's the way they kept some security there. So it was pretty easy to get into, and at that time, there wasn't a lot of competition. So they gave me the hometown I grew up with. Like I said, it was a blue collar suburb of Boston, and double deckers, triple deckers, and at that point, people weren't going away for long periods in the summertime. So it was I had the whole city, 65,000 people. Wow. So in any place you drove, the kids were hanging around playgrounds, and like I said, you weren't taking exotic vacations, and a highly dense population. So, and I said, this is great. So I would work, get up early in the morning, go to the place, buy the ice cream, clean the truck, blah blah blah, and I'd be out on the road 11:30, 11 o'clock in the morning selling ice cream, right, until 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night. Sometimes some streets were really good. I visited twice. The parents weren't too happy with that, but
yeah, I was going to ask, did they give you a route to go on, or was that you were kind of?
They gave me a territory.
Okay, and
they gave me territory, and you figure out your own route, and it's pretty, because the city was so densely populated, you go from street to street basically, and then stop at extra time at the playgrounds, and then in the evening they have softball games, so forth. So made double stops at there would be hundreds of people there. We sold soft drinks too, and so they used to crowd around the truck and that way. So yeah, it was interesting. It was, and of course I was only I was probably a freshman, sophomore in college. So I was young, and you meet on the people on the road pretty close to your age. So it was a social thing too. To some extent, a lot of kids were younger, of course, but yeah.
Was it something that did the idea of running your own business, was that appealing to you getting into it, or was it just kind of like you were looking for a way to make money, this was it, and then maybe?
No, that was appealing to me, because that was just post the plastics factory and the trash pickup. And
yeah,
you're CEO all of a sudden.
So you actually, this is I don't have to pick up trash, and this is I can make some money, and it's all cash, and you wouldn't believe the money. I mean, my first summer was 1969, I think. And a lot of the nickels and dimes added up to a lot of money. I think we made over $10,000 that summer.
Wow.
And that was a lot of money back in 1969. So I was working 7 days a week. So I did it for 4 years and paid my way through school. I had extra money. A couple of school years, I didn't actually work part-time. I didn't work in the school year because I didn't have to, which was good. It was funny. I got into graduate school in a master's program. I had teaching fellowship and a math major. And even that summer in between, I was driving an ice cream truck. I got married at a young age that year, that summer, actually, the beginning of that summer. So we had a nice little apartment, basement apartment, in another suburb of Boston. And, my wife's, meeting in, similarly aged neighbor, and she's talking about her husband. Of course, she's trying to pump me up a bit. Oh, my husband, he's in getting his master's degree, and he's a teaching fellowship. He's teaching undergrads and so forth and so forth. And I kind of blew it because I pulled up on my ice cream truck ringing the bell. And didn't make, she forgot to fill that in, that little detail. But so it was all good though. All good.
Oh, that's fantastic. So, I mean, looking back on, I have to imagine that experience. I mean, it gave you a tremendous opportunity to interact with people, as you mentioned, people of all different ages. So just, learning rapport building and connecting and sales. I mean, that there's so many lessons that you had to pull from that, Dick.
Yeah. My personality is one, I'm an extrovert. So whatever job I had, my early age, my first job was working in a supermarket, right? As a cashier, et cetera. And I'm kind of a social animal. So I would always have develop a lot of rapport with bosses, peers, whatever, even customers. So I enjoyed that part of being with people. So for me, given who I am, that was kind of enjoyable. I mean, just being with different types of people, learning from different types of people. Not all of it was great, color coded, but most of it was good. And yeah, you learn a lot from different types of people. And like I said, I like to think about, observe different things in terms of what my experiences. And I took away a lot from it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Did that?
I think relating to people, even if you're an introvert, you have to find a way to develop relationships, build trust, relate to people, learn from people. I think one of the greatest ways I learned in my whole career was just observe, right? Observe things that you want to emulate and some things you want to avoid. So the good and bad in people and good and bad in aspects of leadership, I had a whole full range of those. And it's like going to school every day. If you go with that attitude, right, that you're learning, and be open to new ideas, but also open to having an ability to critique things too. I see how that bit went on, and I didn't want to do that. I don't want to do it that way. So you learn a lot.
Where do you think that came from, Dick? So many people, they move through life and they're very, they're just caught up in where, myopically in where they are, but they don't necessarily, they don't necessarily reflect as much, or they don't take the time to really be that observer. So there's so many lessons that they miss. Where do you think you learned that from, or how did you come to be somebody who is kind of in the moment but looking over the moment at the same time?
God knows. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm a deep thinker. So and like I said, I do a lot of self-reflection, and I think the way I think is, I try to see behind things. And much later in my business career, I had an exercise where I went to a week away, and I'm in an area where you learn a lot about yourself and learn a lot about other people. And remember this, at the end of that week, the psychologist sits down with you and reads back to you who you are, and they get a pretty good handle on it. And the one thing he said to me is that, well, you're the type of person who sits, in a boat and going down a river, and you're the one that hears the waterfall before anybody else does. So it's kind of, perceptive, perceiving things that people don't perceive. And one thing I learned though, in that little give and take, was that if people don't see what you see, and you're trying to react to that, you're yelling, pull the boat over, get out of the river. Then they say, what the hell is this guy talking about?
Yeah.
And you got to bring people along to see the same things you see through your eyes. So that was kind of a later learning, but very helpful. Where it came from, I don't know. I think I grew up in an Italian family, Italian immigrants. My grandparents were all immigrants. And they were very people-oriented, very family-oriented. It was kind of a lot of give and take in the family. That part of it was growing up was what probably cultivated the people orientation and I don't think extroversion. Everybody has different personality traits, of course. That probably helped. And so I think those were the factors. The way I thought, deep thinker, being an extrovert, being people-oriented, having exposure to a lot of different types of people, were it was an important part of it. Even I was fascinated, for example, just to sit down with my grandparents. And I talked to them a lot about how they immigrated to the country when they were like teens, or my one grandfather came when he was like 18 years old, came to the country, didn't speak English, barely spoke English, had no money. And the best way to get citizenship back then, this is actually 1918. He joined the army immediately and fought in World War II.
Wow.
But you listen to their stories and how they came to the country, took the risk, and how they made their way. Those type of discussions really made a big impression on me.
Yeah.
And in terms of what they had to go through, and put that in perspective, that we all think our life can be difficult, but there's always people who are braver, stronger, navigate through much more significant difficulties, and something you can learn from in terms of what you can aspire to.
Yeah. And, it's so many people's parents, they always joke that the parents tell the stories about, walking 7 miles to school uphill and they're driving snowstorm in both directions, every day, and, those kinds of things. But it sounds like your grandparents really did that. I mean, think about the courage at 18 years old to, get on a ship and go to another country when you barely speak the language, and then getting there and immediately joining the army and going off and fighting. I mean, wow. It's just hard to put into words.
Yeah, we talk about risk taking, right? Or not being afraid to do something different or be challenged. So yeah, that's one big thing I took away from. So that's why, as Dave was going through my introduction, I was in the insurance business, still involved in some way or another for 45 years, and I'm a financial person by training. I'm an actuary by training. But early on in my career, I started running businesses, and even the first business I ran, which was a small business, was a turnaround situation. That excited me. The idea of getting involved with a situation that was not going well and making a difference. And the risk of it wasn't as present in my mind as the opportunity. And so I think, some of that learning of different experiences when I was growing up, both with, relatives and grandparents, and also jobs, and trying different jobs kind of prepared me for venturing into different opportunities in my career that were challenging. And some things I kind of shied away from, just like anybody else, right? And I learned that sometimes the risk taking is a lot less than the risk standing pat. And I've had experiences in some insurance companies that somebody was working for doing the same job, working with the same person for 15 years. I said, what a waste of talent. And that should never happen to anybody. Shame on the company for letting that happen. People should be, experienced and be willing to experience different things in life and try things and try something new. I think that a lot of your learning, if not most of it, takes place when you're outside your comfort zone. It accelerates the learning and intensifies it. So when I look back in my life, I learned the most, whether it's, the different jobs I had, my personal situation or my business situation, when I was kind of outside my comfort zone. It's a little scary, but when I look back, it was a great experience. I learned a lot.
When you've done that, even from a relatively young age. I mean, I remember you sharing with me about the high school that you went to, and that I think you told me it was an hour and a half. It was like trains, planes, and automobiles kind of experience getting to school every day.
North of Boston to south of Boston, I went to a Jesuit high school and grew up in the local city. I mentioned blue collar city. We went to parochial school, and then I could have gone to the public high school. There's some parochial schools nearby. So, but I looked into this Jesuit school. I was kind of really intrigued by the curriculum, but also probably more importantly, the type of culture it had and the kids who were attracting from different areas. And I wanted to give it a shot. And of course, we didn't have any money. It was, tuition back then was, I think it was like $500 back then. It was a lot of money, right? But my father, he's willing to say, listen, if you want to do it, we'll make it work. And so I get on a bus, 7:30 in the morning, then a train, subway, then another subway, then walked a mile. And sometimes we embellish those stories, right? But that's true. Those stories. It was an hour and 20 minutes or so. I learned a lot on the subway.
Good opportunity to observe there,
Yeah. Oh boy, there was a lot to observe. It was funny, but we did that, and that really opened my eyes. I mean, that really was I'm glad I did. I still support the school financially because of so much impact on my life. And, both the culture, the the Jesuit type of value system, and also the intellectual curiosity that inspired, as well as I'm rubbing shoulders from kids from all different parts of the city area, some of the suburbs, different economic strata, some not having any money like me, some having a lot of money, diversity of race, although not as diverse as you see now, but there was some diversity of race and ethnic background. So it was a great learning experience.
Well, and the Jesuits are very, it's very values oriented, kind of principles driven type education. So what were those values or those principles that you really carried from that you think ripple in you to this day?
Well, it did make a big impact. Certainly there's a spirituality to it, of course. And with that, a community type of engagement. You just weren't going to school. You were part of a community. And you looked out for one another, and you cared about each other, whether teachers or students or your peers and so forth. And a lot of emphasis of looking out beyond yourself. And the Jesuits, one of the themes they talk about is men or women for others, right? That your purpose on earth is to help other people, not to help only yourself. So kind of look outside yourself for whether service or contributions or adding value to society versus just selfishly trying to get as much as you can from society. So I think that was an important aspect of my education, a lot of which really fit me, intellectual stimulus, the learning. And, I think like any good school or education program, not the content was interesting and quite valuable, but they taught you how to learn, how to educate yourself and what do you need to do to educate yourself. So that was an important aspect of it. And it certainly played into my desire to continue to learn. Maybe to really bolster that, maybe that that really led to my, strong motivation to continue to learn as much as I could. And, very values-based, as you mentioned, and, high integrity, you're big, be part of something bigger than yourself, make a positive contribution, care about people. And so those are, key elements of it. And we lived it. We tutored students at the housing project, mostly, minority type of population. We played sports with them. We would run charity drives, every morning. They would pass around a little box they call the bike box. You actually make contribution for your nickels and dimes, and they would distribute to the poor. So those types of themes, along with it was a competitive school. Don't get me wrong, it was a competitive school, and that was part of it. The peer drive to be competitive, that's an important aspect. But it also was one where you look beyond yourself as well.
Yeah, even just expanding your view of the world, what else is in there. I think that's, definitely notice that even, whether it's a new job or a new school or, going away to school or traveling, it's amazing just the mindset shift, I think, that happens when you realize like, wow, the world is like a lot bigger than I had previously thought. That's
right. And going to that school created that, broader view. And then I think everything I did in future life was, try to drive to that broader view. You mentioned I joined New York Life to run their international business. And I did that for 5 years. It was later in my career. But one of my stops, I worked for 5 major insurance companies. And that was like my 4th company. So, but I had never worked international before. And I was working at the Hartford, which they had a very good job there. We were very successful. We did a major acquisition. I was running good business. And I loved the people there, and there was, it was a good company. But I had a colleague who introduced me to a person that was soon to be CEO. He's only 40 years old and very dynamic. And I got interested to even explore it. And we talked about, he was interested in getting somebody with my background who knew how to run business, especially turnaround situations. And we couldn't find the right entry point. Like 8-9 months into it, he mentioned, would you like to run our international business? I said, well, why me? And he said, well, we got a lot of problems. You know how to fix problems. And so, I joined them. So it was a whole different deal, right? At the time I was living in Connecticut. I was working for a Connecticut-based company just outside of Hartford. And so this had me in an apartment in New York City near the company. And we had 6 businesses, subsidiaries in Asia and 3 in Latin America. And my first day on the job, I had a group of people, it was like a holding company structure. So we had a group of people in New York, Manhattan, and we had another group of people in Hong Kong, and then these 9, 4 of which were joint ventures. And my first day on the job, I showed up and we did some meetings in Manhattan. Then I jumped on a plane to Hong Kong that afternoon. And so, I spent 2 weeks in Asia and came back. But, a few weeks later, I said, what the heck did I do?
I've done that flight before. It's a long one.
Actually, my first company was with 23 years. It was a part of a conglomerate, but was a family founded insurance company. It recently, when I joined them within the last few years, it was assimilated into a conglomerate, but still had that family feel to it and very close-knit company. And it was great because it was small enough. I got exposure to all different aspects of the insurance business, and also worked with the parent and got exposure to, the financial aspects and also the business aspects of being part of a conglomerate. We did a public offering, all that. And, I stayed 23 years from the company, but then we were acquired, and, I came to the conclusion that the company I worked for was gone. And now the question was, do I want to work for a new company? Right. And that was hard. It was hard to, you went through a grieving process. You had to give up something, right? Mm-hmm. And you were acquired, so it was not. You didn't make this as a choice, which I learned. I did a lot of M&A, a fair amount of M&A work during my career, and that was my first time big exposure to M&A work. I was acquired, and I learned that if you're acquired, one of the cultural issues you have to deal with people being acquired is that they didn't choose that. Mm-hmm. And it's really interesting because if you choose to leave a company and go to another company and take the risk, you become a lot more amenable to change and adapting to the new environment. Sure. When somebody tells you to do something, you're forced to do it, you resist more because you didn't make that choice. It's very interesting aspect of human nature. And when I joined New York Life International, it was very much a learning experience. And I learned that through those experiences in previous jobs and that job, like I said, the risk taken sometimes is less risky than staying put and being, having your career deteriorate, your skills not really developed, and you miss the opportunity to be exposed to all these new things. So when they offered me the international job in New York Life, I said, I'm going to jump at it. And my wife thought I was crazy, when I was saying that I learned through these job changes. My first job change with a company I worked for 23 years, and subsequent every 5 years I went to Mass Mutual, then 5 years Hartford, 5 years New York Life. And I chose to leave because I wanted something different. I was ready for something different, and I could have stayed in those companies and found something, but something else came down the pipe. And then my last company was Lincoln Financial, but I learned the process of what you go through when you jump into something new, whether it's you stay in your own company and take on a whole different experience, or you leave the company, which is even more dramatic because you have a different culture, you have a different organization, you have to reestablish your relationships with establish new relationships, all that. And I learned that you go through this cycle, and I characterize it as a learning curve. And I often mentored people who went through changes and gave them this advice, and they thought, they look at you and say, oh yeah, I get it. And then they come back to me and say, you were right. And I'm not going brilliant. I just learned it through brute force. Experience is that when you take on something new, it's a change curve that you go through, even when you choose to do it, right? Mm-hmm. So you're willing to take the risk, so you're more amenable, adaptable to change, but still it's a change. And you have to go through a learning curve, and the learning curve is a lot longer than people admit to themselves. They think they can take on a new job and 3 months I'll be up to speed. Well, my experience is it takes a year to get even competent. 2 years to hit your stride, 3 years to see results. That's the way I think of it. And you go to this curve of emotion. If you can map your emotion on a curve, and you have a positive side and a negative side of this axis, right? So when you join a company, you're on a very positive side. In fact, you're on a high. At first, when you offer the job, and actually when you initially start, you have this really high point, really excited about the opportunity and so forth. Then that curve slowly starts to go down when you learn how big the job is, how much you don't know, how out of control you are, and you get into negative territory. And the low point, it's not a smooth curve, it's up and down, but the low point actually takes place like 6 months after you take on the opportunity. Because, and then you start asking yourself some questions like, why did I take this job? Can I do this job? Can I do this job? Am I equipped to do this job? Will I be successful? And is this worth it? Is this worth it? You ask yourself those questions. And I learned that what you have to have is faith in the due diligence process you went through when you took the job. First, for somebody to offer the job to you, they have confidence in your abilities and they think you're a good fit for the job. No, doesn't happen. That's right all the time, but it has a good chance of being right if people who are evaluating, the new employers evaluating you in terms of your ability. And then you go through your own due diligence, your self-reflection, due diligence, asking questions, and so forth. And you go through a process that, I think this is a good fit for me in terms of the challenge, the opportunity, ability to do it, the fun associated with the fun has to be important, excitement, right? So you have to keep reminding yourself when you hit that low point and say, this is why you are where you are, and kind of put those questions aside and put one step in front of another. And I find that, after, a period of time, and like I said, a year, you probably get up to the more positive territory that, I feel confident now, right? And then now question, how do I make a mark, right? But you have to go through that process, and it's a lot longer than people realize. Everybody thinks they're so I'm smarter than the average bear, right? I can get through this quick. But it often takes longer. And I found this actually in personal situations too. When my father died at a young age, he was only 59, I was 30, right? And then you go through a grieving process. And I learned that my grieving process was actually more intense 6 months after he died. Because roughly, right? When something happens like that, you have a lot of support system. People are paying attention. A lot of people asking how you're doing. They're trying to help you out, so forth. 6 months later, you're more alone with your thoughts and your feelings and so forth. So I kind of related that, what I was feeling then, into my previous experience on work and vice versa. So, I'm, as you can tell, I'm a little bit of a student of human nature. Like I said, I'm a financial person, but I love human nature and the aspects of leadership, because people always, it's very complex and people are always changing. But that aspect, that human dynamic of what do you go through to change, right? To adjust. It's a loss of a loved one or taking on a new challenge, a new job. You have to go through a process, and you have to be very self-reflective. So the process doesn't drive you. You drive the process, right? So that you manage the process, that you don't become a victim. You become somebody who can manage it. And so I think that's an important lesson for anybody trying something new. First, don't be afraid to look at new challenges and take a risk with your own company and take on a different assignment and somebody offering you something. You only grow when you're outside your comfort zone. So don't be afraid about, outside your comfort zone. That's an opportunity. Look for those opportunities, take them, knowing that it will be a process to get through the learning curve, that process of adjustment. It's going to take time. Have confidence in that you'll get through it, and you'll get through it. And then the amount of learning that takes place and the exhilaration of having gone through that process and taking advantage of the opportunity and seeing success and having a lot more self-confidence, those are all big benefits, the pluses of going through something like that.
Well, it sounds like, Dick, you mentioned like kind of the 6 month dip after, going into something new. And it totally makes sense, you kind of mirroring that with the loss of your dad. So it sounds like, when you were going into a new opportunity and you kind of hit that low point, maybe 6 months in, your kind of strategy was, one, reaffirm that they believe I can do this. Otherwise they wouldn't have given me the opportunity, and reaffirm that I took this for a reason and this is worthwhile. Did you have, one, is
Exactly.
that accurate? And two,
Yes.
you have kind of like a similar, affirmation that you dealt with, the grieving of your dad.
Yes. Yeah, that's you got it. So yeah, those are key questions you have to ask yourself. And or let's say, we all talk about. I do think I don't forget the term they use, like self-narratives, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's always a tape playing in your brain about when you're going through things, right? And that's a tape you want to be playing when you're going through change, right? You took the job for a reason. People gave you the job for a reason. that were positive. You wouldn't have done it. They wouldn't have given to you. So you play that tape to yourself when you're going through hard times. And, when you lose a loved one, like I mentioned, my father, I'm not sure what the tape said, but I think probably be more in touch with your feelings. And this, probably men is harder than women, but I guess, how you're wired, but, be in touch with your feelings that, all right, going through this is normal, right? And I think a lot of the depression you see in society is where people are feeling things and they feel like they're not normal, right? And something in the affirmation that what they feel is normal, just have, like I said, they have to learn how to manage it versus become a victim. Yeah. And that's hard. Easy to say, hard to do, right?
Sure.
And setting expectations. I mean, just in having you lay that out and say, hey, look, 6 months in, most people are going to have a dip, because their support system isn't there the same way it was in day one. You're overwhelmed by the magnitude of, what's in front of you and what you don't know. And, and hey, it's okay to feel that way. Yeah. Just having that expectation going in makes it easier to go through.
Yeah. It reminds me of a story that Joe, our CEO, told about when he was first hired out of college. A guy that hired him, was his mentor, still is his mentor, but, he set that expectation saying, I hired you for a reason. I don't think you can do this job. I know you can do this job. And at some point you're going to want to quit. And you just have to give me your word that when that point comes, don't give up. And I think that was, so brilliant, seeing ahead, but everybody's going to go through that at some point. To be able to reaffirm that at that time seems like such a powerful tape to play in your words.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a good example, as a leader who hires people, right? You have to have that in mind. So you have to help them understand that that's the process, right? Help them go through the process. Maybe things you can do to facilitate the process, the immersion, the orientation, whatever you need to do. Also, the mentoring, the coaching, plus your own observation of somebody you've hired, right? And build the expectation, but also help them to know that they will be going through rough spots. So I think it's for the person hiring somebody, having that understanding of what they're going through is also very important if you're going to be an effective leader.
Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. Dick, there's something else that you've always gravitated towards that I have found so intriguing. I remember, Sean had just mentioned about our CEO, and he shared with me, it was a piece of advice, I think it was given to him by his uncle as he was starting out his career. He said, as you go into these organizations, if there's a problem, volunteer to fix it. And he said, because everybody recognizes it a problem, odds are you're not going to screw it up any worse than it already is. And by doing that, you become recognized in the organization as being somebody who's good at solving things. And, it strikes me that you've sort of followed that advice your whole career. You did it at Paul Revere when they had the struggling business unit. You've kind of followed that similar process through by taking on those challenges or not being afraid to go at those problem areas. What have you learned, and how did you have the confidence to start out doing that, even at Revere?
Yeah. Well, I think, first I don't want to blow it up, I don't want to make myself better than I am. There's some things I shied away from, and because of that, but there's many things that I did take advantage of that opportunity. So you're right. If you're running an enterprise, whatever it is, you want people who can solve problems, right?
Yeah.
And then somebody who takes on the self-initiative to solve problems, even better, right? You don't have to give it. They look for those things to fix and or improve or add value. It's all about adding value, right? Sometimes, let's be realistic about corporate life or any business life. Sometimes you're not rewarded for the value, or people don't appreciate it, or there's a different value system that you think you're adding value, but somebody doesn't perceives value differently than you do. But by and large, if you're able to grab a hold of certain things and create value, solve problems, and take the initiative to do that, that makes you a valuable commodity, a valuable person. At the same time, you're learning a lot more and learning different things. I had experience once with somebody, a senior executive, he did very well, but when he first joined the company, he noticed his boss had a tremendous amount of work flowing into his office. He was a lawyer, and he said he offered to his boss, I'll take your in basket, Right now, we're virtual investing, but at that time, it's paper investing. And I'll take it home every night. I'll sort through it, and I'll organize it for you and prepare notes in terms of what you should be paying attention to, what your key issues are, and so forth. And I'll give that to you in the morning. Right. So did it require extra work? Right. But think about what happened. Right. First, he learned what was going on in the company in much more accelerated rate, right? Because he was exposed to everything his boss was exposed to. Two, he was helping his boss be more effective. So was he building loyalty with his boss and appreciation? Absolutely, right? Third, he was having an impact on the company because he actually could shape how his boss responded, and thus the company was being managed in a way. So it was kind of a brilliant stroke. Did it require extra effort? A lot of extra effort. Initiative, yes. Take a risk, right? I'm telling his boss he's going to do that, right? But it created a tremendous opportunity for him to learn, have an impact, and build a lot of loyalty with his superior. Kind of interesting.
Yeah. Dick, I wanted to circle back because I'm curious. You mentioned before, you've been involved in a lot of M&A work, and one of the things that you noticed was, when a company gets acquired, the people didn't choose that change, and therefore they seem to be, their self-defense mechanisms kind of go up, and they're a little bit more resistant to any change coming in. Maybe they're feeling like things are kind of out of their control a little bit. How did you go about, once you realized that, how did you go about making people maybe feel more comfortable with the change, or kind of, helping those teams to come together when people are kind of coming in with their defenses up a bit?
Important question, big question, often not really appreciated by companies who go to M&A. That's why a lot of them don't work, right?
Yeah.
M&A, just to digress for a moment, I think there's 3 or 4 things that have to happen. It has to be a good strategic fit. Either, economies of scale, new market, blah, blah, new product. It has to be a good strategy. 2, you can't overpay. 3, you have to integrate well. And 4, you have to deal with the people issues. And your question touched upon the people issues. And yes, the people being acquired go through that tremendous change because they didn't choose that. But also, I learned that the people who are part of the acquiring company are also going through change. And it's kind of interesting. My first exposure to acquisition, I'd say part of it was required. I learned a lot of things you shouldn't do. And then when I was when I joined Mass Mutual, I joined them a year after a very, very difficult merger. And they acquired actually a company. It was very, very difficult. So I learned what happens in the aftermath if M&A is not handled well, right? Then at Hartford, I had my chance to actually engineer an acquisition. With what I learned, I was very, very successful, right? And so, focus on those points I mentioned. But on the people side is that first, you have to be priority right from day one. So and you even going through the due diligence process, you learn about the nature, the character, the culture of the organization you're acquiring, and also reflect upon how it's going to affect the acquiring company as well. And then I think it's very important to communicate frequently and well, and be not afraid to communicate when you don't have the answers, but to acknowledge that there are questions, and to be honest, as transparent and honest as you can be, and don't promise something you can't keep. For example, we announced the acquisition, almost all the people aren't aware of it. It's announced, right? So the early days, or literally days, 2 or 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, people are going to be asking you all kinds of questions you don't have answers for. Mm-hmm. So first, you acknowledge it, validate it. Good question. Here's how we're going to think about, maybe talk about how you're going to look at ways to answer that question. No, don't speculate, but we hope to have an answer by this point. But when you say this point, be very conservative so you don't disappoint people. Mm-hmm. So they can live with ambiguity. Living with ambiguity is challenging, but at least if you acknowledge the question and say, please live with this ambiguity, and the ambiguity will end by a certain date, certain point in the future, then people they can adapt to that more readily. And I think, you can't over communicate, whether it's small groups, one-on-one, large groups, formally through, videos or conference calls or whatever, have as much exposure as you can in front of people to explain. First, you got to explain why this happened. What was the motivation? What was the objective of what we're trying to achieve and what you're trying, the objective is going to be, stronger, bigger, better company, more opportunity for everybody. But you have to go through change, right? And people actually up front, or people are going to lose their job. So I don't think you should skirt that issue, for example. You should say, well, part of this is, there are going to be economies, and some jobs will be eliminated. And if we do our job well, enough growth will come from this that we can, retain people, but maybe in different jobs. But there will be people where it's not going to be possible, that the timing's not going to be right, or it's just not going to be a good job fit. And let them know that that is a risk. So be honest with them, because people are smart. They perceive that. You can tell them it's not going to happen, but then you really start losing your credibility. But this is part of the situation here. But the vast majority of people have good roles and so forth. And so if that's the example, it's hard to be honest. And does that disturb people? Yeah. But it disturbs people less than trying to color code and say, no, it's not a problem, and just gloss over it. So I think it's important to be honest and transparent as best you can, and also communicate frequently, and also explain that they're going through change. And the learning curve I mentioned earlier. Well, there's a change curve that everybody goes through when they have to go through change. Educate people about that. Not me, I do, but try to create as many disciples as possible in terms of communicating as well as educating that you're going to go through these types of feelings, and you're not crazy, you're not abnormal. This is what people go through. This is a normal process. You feel you're going to have anger, you're going to have remorse, grief. You have to give up something. You have to let go of something. You have to have kind of an exploratory type of start listening and exploring, being open to something new. And then you start to learn about it and educate yourself and become more comfortable with it. And then at some point, we'll ask you to commit to it, right? But I often point out to people, you can't ask people to commit to something if they don't understand it and don't have an opportunity to ask questions. That's another thing. You have to create a two-way dialogue. You just can't speak to people. You have to listen to them, validate their feelings, listen to what they're saying. You don't have to agree with everything, but you want to be heard, right? And sometimes, people, they love to have their ideas accepted, but they appreciate people listening and giving an honest hearing of what they're saying, and they have a voice. They feel more comfortable, adapting to the change, even though it's maybe not exactly what they would have done or how they would have engineered things. But they understand, and you need to explain your rationale. So there's a reason. Thank you for that feedback. We decided to go this way. This is why, and appreciate the fact that you were able to offer your thoughts. And people are more willing to adapt to that, than saying this is the way it is. First, you're not transparent initially, and you're not all transparent about whether change is necessary. You don't really actively listen to people, and they feel like they're nobody cares about them, right? They're left off to fend for themselves. And the other thing you need to do is be honest. Like, when you talk about change with people, say, listen, there are going to be some people who are going to go through this curve, and they're not going to be able to come out the other end. They're just not going to be happy, and it's not going to be a good fit for them. And it doesn't make them bad people. It just doesn't work for them, and it may be important for them to go off and do something different in a different place. And that doesn't make it, bad or evil or something. This is that it's not a good fit. So, just be honest with people how this is all going to shake out. And I think people, many people see this. Some people don't, but to validate it, that what they're feeling, what they anticipate to happen, is what's going to happen. Is reassuring to them in a way, even though there's a lot of ambiguity and uncertainty and risk in going through change like that. They understand the process. They understand that people are sensitized to there is a process they have to go through, and help them go through it. I think those are some of the key elements of managing change of any type. That's not just M&A, but M&A is very intense because it takes place very quickly. You're putting two organizations together in some cases, and all the changes associated with it. It's like change on steroids, right? Yeah. And I often say you see the best in people and see the worst in people going through something like that. But you want to help people see the better angels. They're better angels, and help them. And you want to help them through the change.
Yeah, I love how you just described that, because certainly we've seen through our business a lot of organizations who have been acquired or are acquiring other organizations, and the integration side of it is such a heavy focus for so many organizations, but it's always the people side that ends up being the problem, and that so often defines whether a merger or acquisition works or it doesn't. And I think a lot of leaders, they they don't put anywhere near enough weight on that people side of things, and having those conversations and asking those questions, and perhaps spend more time, dictating this is how it's going to go, rather than recognizing that we need to create more of a dialogue.
Yeah, it's always a mystery to me, and maybe companies are smarter now, but why that is, people don't emphasize the things you just talked about in terms of the people, the cultural aspects of it, because that will kill you.
Oh, absolutely.
First, you lose a lot of good talent. Perhaps the cultural issues could be debilitating. I mean, I've seen companies that merged or acquired, like 20 years later, there's still like an undercurrent of cultural differences and conflict, right? They never really got through it, and it can be debilitating. But too often, it's not given the weight and that's because it's soft, and it's like anything cultural or soft aspects of leadership that you can't measure. It's hard to measure. It's hard to quantify. Much easier to focus on transactional aspect or integration, or the getting this technology done and so forth. It's harder to focus on the people side because it's complex. It's kind of squishy. It's hard to know how you're making progress and measure that, and it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It's uncomfortable for everybody. It's uncomfortable people leading the change, experiencing the change. Some people and all that. So it's not uncomfortable. But again, part of that change dialogue is to say, and listen, I know this is hard, but when you look back upon this in your career, 10 years now, 20 years from now, you're going to see this period of time, no matter how it turns out, there's a period of tremendous learning. And you'll be a stronger person as a result, and actually a more valuable person to whatever organization you're going to be part of in the future. So, emphasize the people, even though you're going through some pain, there's a benefit. First, paint the picture of how the objective, this is going to have a bigger, stronger, better business, but also they're going to be better, stronger people as a result of it, even though it's challenging and difficult. So I think that's an important ingredient. And again, part of it's hope. Mm-hmm. When people don't have hope, they can go through difficult times if they feel there's hope on the other side in terms of what they're going to be able to get, what's going to come out the other side. Yeah. So I think it's important to paint that picture. But it is amazing to me. Very, very smart people, don't invest time and enough time and energy in that aspect of any type of change in business, but particularly M&A.
Well, I think it was George Washington Carver who said, "Where there is no vision, there is no hope." And and so people, they will embrace change more readily if there's a purpose they understand that's behind it. To your point, by just helping them to see that this is, yes, I understand this is difficult, but you will look back on this, and this will be one of the greatest times of learning and growth that you have in your career. So you're not only painting the corporate vision, but you're painting the vision for them in their lives as well, which gives them that sense of hope that, I can get through this and I will end up better for it. Dick,
exactly.
One of the things that you place a lot of emphasis on, and I've watched you do it time and time again, is leadership and culture. And I think you're, the management side you can see on a spreadsheet, it's tangible, and so it's and so most people gravitate towards that, which is why so much focus gets done on integrations and so little focus gets done on the people side. But you inherently, through your experiences, have understood the influence of really leadership and culture. So let's kind of dive a little deeper there. From a leadership perspective, what is it that you've learned, and what is it that you look for in those leaders around you?
Well, like you say, you have a lot of experiences of good leadership, examples of good leadership and examples of poor leadership. But one thing why, like I said, I'm a financial person, I'm a numbers guy. Mm-hmm. But I learned early on that the leadership, people, culture aspects of any enterprise, any community of people, it's a nonprofit or a church organization, even your personal family or business, the people, relationships, the cultural aspects, the leadership aspects are very important. And one thing is, it's so powerful. I mean, it's extremely powerful if you have the right culture with the right people aligned around a vision, equipped with the tools necessary to be successful, a type of culture where it's a continuous learning environment, where they're not afraid to speak up, which is an important ingredient, by the way. The fear of avoiding the saying what's really in your mind is really can be debilitating, and you need to create an environment where people can say what's on their mind. That is, if you get that right, you can move mountains. I've seen, and I've done turnarounds, right? I've seen situations where you may not have the best strategy. Your technology may not be that great. Your service aspects may have defects, but if you have, people aligned around a vision and enable, as I pointed out, you can move a mountain. You do want to have good strategy. You do want to have good tools. You want to have good technology, and that would be just make it even stronger. But even despite those things, if those things weren't so good, if you get the people organized properly, you can make them continue. Can make important positive steps in the right direction. So the power of it is really compelling. And then I've seen also the converse, right? That if it's not working well, everything else doesn't work well. I mean, so you get the cultural undertones affect people's performance. You tend to lose good people. You keep the people you don't want to keep. You're not properly motivating people. It spills over to the customers, because a company's culture reflects onto the customers. See, more often than not, a company's culture is reflected in how they deal with customers and what the customers experience, right? So if there's a lot of anger in the company, the customer's going to perceive that, maybe not directly, but they'll see it indirectly. And conversely, when there's a lot of harmony and the positive reinforcing culture, it creates a more satisfying customer experience. It's not the whole thing. I mean, you do need to get the nuts and bolts right. The technology, the service aspects, the products have to be good and so forth. But the people cultural aspects are a really critical component. And so I learned early on the power of it getting it right, and also the debilitating effects on not getting it right. So that's what created the priority in my mind in terms of paying a lot of attention to that.
Yeah. So, when you were going into a new business, was it kind of a gut feel? Like when you seem to have prioritized looking at culture as one of those things that you'd evaluate, in walking through the door. How did you go about evaluating it? You mentioned, interactions with customers. Was it conversations you were having with, some of the leadership there or people, general gut feel? What was your kind of process like to evaluate, okay, this culture is good or this one's is bad, and here are the kind of problem areas we need to focus on?
Well, good question. Like I said, a lot of my learning is through experiences. And by the way, I think I learned as much from my mistakes, maybe more than my victories, right? So it's a combination thing. And even going back to high school days, right? I talked about my job experience and so forth. You learn a lot about what you did right and what things you need to do, what you worked, and also you observe other people. And again, I'm a deep thinker, I'm an observer. So remember I mentioned that. So for example, the first business I even ran at Paul Revere was running a reinsurance business that was losing money, and we turned it around. But the reinsurance business, we had like 30 other insurance companies. We reinsured them. We had a relationship where we took their excess risk and also provided expertise. So part of my job was to get out and visit these companies, right? And I would often show up at these meetings, maybe with a colleague, maybe not, and be a room of 10 other people, and they would pepper me with questions, and I was supposed to be the expert in this particular area. And by visiting different companies, I learned first that you had to know your stuff inside and out, just like teaching. When you teach something, you have to learn it better than if you're a student. Mm-hmm. So they had that aspect to it. But the other thing, I was able to perceive that every company has a different personality, just like people. And sometimes you can sense it. I mean, right away you see some commonality or some differences. The first hour, if I went into a company and I visited with them, just walking around, just in a brief interaction with people, after an hour or two, you start to develop a sense of the culture of the organization. It's kind of amazing if you look for it, right? And of course, the more you work with it and deal with them, you get the nuances, right? So I guess I became more of a student of different organizational structures, different cultures, different leadership aspects, by that example, but also everything I did up to that point was paying very perceptive to that. So I gained of appreciation, a student of leadership and culture, right? The differences, the similarities, what worked, what didn't work. And a lot of it's learned from my own experiences, some of my failures as well. So when I got involved with a new situation, I think I had my antenna a little bit maybe sharpened by those experiences. I always pick up the nuances, right? And I would ask a lot of questions. And this is how I operate anyway. I take a more Socratic approach and ask questions versus declarative sentences, and ask a lot of questions, let people talk, right? And a lot of different people. And I would try to talk to as many people as I could by the phone, face to face, whatever. And this, even customers. And you get a sense of you start to put together a mosaic, and I like puzzles. I like to put together puzzles anyway, business puzzles anyway. So that's part of my nature. So you start to put together a mosaic, if you will, of the as-is state in terms of leadership, culture, and having the background, know what works and what doesn't work. You have a kind of a vision about where it should be. Where it is today and where it should be. But you don't have to be brilliant to, very perceptive to do this. I remember every time the day in an earlier discussion, when I went to Mass Mutual, I mentioned that the business I took charge of, the whole company had gone through a very difficult merger. The business I took over was a mess. It was, in every way, right? And this poor job of integration across the board. And then they had, two groups of people from each company that they were at each other's throats, and even on organization charts, even a year later, they put down in parentheses the company they were from. Kind of perpetuate the cultural differences, right? And they were busing some of the employees from the old company, the acquiring company, down to where the acquired company is, and they weren't happy about being bused to a different location, all this stuff. And I learned a lot about getting involved and really understanding the culture they were coming from, the fears they had, and so forth. And I got them to try to get them to open up about it. And I remember, early on, I was gathering of a cross section of a leadership group, maybe 20 people, 25 people, and get them in a room and said, "Let's talk," right? And they wouldn't talk. I had to say, "Well, what's the problem?" I had to be very honest with them. "What's the problem? Why are you afraid to talk?" And they were fearful of speaking up, and they actually quote examples of people spoke up and they didn't end up well. So you have to, get through that fear and they get people to trust, and then as they opened up and expressed their opinions and what their feelings were, and as important as their opinions, you start to again develop a understanding of the issues. But part of that process, that Mass Mutual, was kind of interesting. Like I said, you just have to draw people's attention to this. But we had an exercise in that group where he said, let's brainstorm everything about today's culture, this organization. Let's just describe it, right? So a woman got up at the flip chart and we brainstormed. She wrote down all the aspects of the culture, right? Then another person got up and went to another flip chart. So let's talk about the type of culture you would like to see, right? What would you want it to be? And they wrote that all down, right? So as this so happens, the first flip chart was written in brown pen, and the second flip chart was written in purple pen. And so what does this tell us, right? So one of the Shire executives was brave enough to raise their hand and said, well, we have to go from brown to purple. And actually that became shorthand for the cultural change that we wanted to go through. So if it's a shorthand, our conversations from that point forward, so we got to go from brown to purple. This is brown behavior, not purple behavior, right? And it became shorthand. We actually then educated the rest of the organization what that meant. I forget the terms we used, but it's sort of like that. Yeah. So, he had a group of people, they were able to brainstorm the culture fairly accurately, the culture they were living with. And they also did a very good job of brainstorming. And this is like, this is 15 minutes. This is not 15 days of the culture that you like to see, right? And so the people can see that if the attention is brought to that and with some facilitation, you can see that. And then they would become, and then you create the energy. We want to go from brown to purple because they see the purple culture and say, I want to get there. That's the type of business I want to work for. I want the type of people, organization I want to be part of. And they became very motivated to figure out how to go from brown to purple. And they're very creative about all the different things that need to happen. And then we talked about, all right, the how-to, right? The how-to is much more complicated, right? But they were motivated at that point. And the best ideas came from people in the ranks in terms of how to do that.
Yeah, it's interesting, but it seems like, the whole, brainstorm and process is just, you mentioned in the beginning, people a year in, right, still writing down the company that they were coming from and still not seeing themselves as an employee of this organization that was, brought together. It kind of reminds me, for whatever reason, just popped into my head. There's a great scene, and I don't know if you guys have seen the movie Miracle about the 1980s Miracle on Ice. Mm-hmm. And there's the great scene of Herb Brooks, have running sprints with all the players, and every once in a while he'd stop and he'd ask one of them, what's your name and who do you play for? And they'd all say, Boston College and, University of Minnesota Gophers and whoever. And he was just running these guys ragged. And then finally Eruzione, who, at least in the movie, I don't think this is how it played out, but he's the one that finally said, Mike Eruzione, I play for the United States of America. Yeah. And then he called it. But it strikes me as, kind of a similar objective in the end of getting these people to feel like they're playing for the same team and having some identity in the organization and the culture that they're developing.
Yeah, that's a true story, by the way.
Is it true? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I thought that it
so
was.
First, Eruzione was perceptive enough to figure out what he was driving to.
Yeah.
And then he was also brave enough to say it.
Yeah,
which is kind of interesting because he drove him ragged, so he said, "I got to do something to stop this misery."
Yeah, yeah, exactly like we said before.
It's like the boot camp process. Yeah. I remember.
So,
I remember years ago we had one of our Japanese clients. They had acquired another Japanese company, and it was exactly what you described, Dick. Where a year and a half later, they were still, I'm legacy this and I'm legacy that. And I remember one of the things that he did, which I thought was genius, is he recognized that in order to get them to let go of the legacy, he had to give them something new to grab onto that was a merged or combined culture of the two. And I've never forgot it. It's kind of like if you're asking somebody to swing out on a vine, you've got to show them another vine to grab onto if you want to get them to let go of the one that they're swinging on right now.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very, very important.
Yeah.
People are going to hang on. People are going to hang on to what they know, right?
Exactly.
Unless they're motivated. So what's the motivation to change? Because we want, it could be, a lot. It could be fear. It could be, it could be reward. It could be a combination. But, you got to get them. So we want to go from here to there. And they got to understand what that there is. And, conceptual terms. You don't have to be all the questions to answer and all the detail. But for them to let go, right? And letting go is very important, and it doesn't happen naturally often. You have to, let go for what reason? Where am I going to, right?
Yeah.
But you're right, absolutely right. That's an important ingredient to managing change.
How do you go about, as particularly in a merged organization where it seems like if you're bringing two organizations together, the safest bet is you have to have both of them feel like they're letting go of something to grab hold of something that's better. So how do you go about creating a new or a merged culture that's better than the legacy ones?
Well, that's kind of, it's not easy. And I'm a firm believer. It can't be just top down, it has to be bottom up.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, you can't have the senior executive go in a closet and say, this is the culture we want to create, and hand it out to people and say, all right, let's get here, right? That's a very participative project. You can guide it, and you can throw some straw models out and get people to react to it. But you have to have people react. You have to create a dialogue.
Yeah.
Because they're not going to own it unless they're part of it, right? I mentioned that. People are not going to commit to something unless they understand it, and then they can have input. They can have a voice, right? So I think it's an iterative process where you talk about culture and why it's important, and you talk about the cultural aspects that you want to aspire to, and what current cultural aspects are, and what's good and you want to keep, and what some things that may have to be different. But you also have to have people articulate in their own words too, and and there's no right or wrong here, but well, I know it's the wrong part of it is for senior leadership to go in the closet, come up with some fancy cultural statement, say here it is, in the words that you want to use, and they don't understand it, and they didn't participate. They don't think they shaped it. They don't even the language is something they wouldn't use, right? Yeah. And every organization is different how they want to express it, and sometimes, very often, that cultural statement of where they want to go to may not be perfect. It may not be polished as much as you would like it to be, but it's their own, right? They own it. And 80-20, that's much better than having something that looks pretty, but nobody feels a sense of ownership or the fact they didn't participate in it. So I think you have to go through a process which is iterative to get people to, explain, the current culture, where you want to get to, have management talk about it, but also have people have input to it, to what they feel, and have kind of an iterative process. But it's not easy. And sometimes that doesn't come together well. Sometimes it does. Sometimes Dave was involved with my experience in Lincoln where we struggled and all of a sudden light bulbs went on. Yeah. You struggle for 4 or 5 months and all of a sudden light bulbs start going on. So something that comes, all of a sudden comes together. But so I've had all different experiences. But any cultural change, whether it's M&A or even within a company, you want to improve the culture. It has to be a participant situation where with big organizations, it's hard to have everybody have the same volume of participation, but you have to have some type of participative effort. Some people maybe participate more than others, but if everybody thinks they have some influence over it, right? Yeah. They know somebody who's participating and they can give them feedback, things like that. Or even surveys. You take surveys and play it back to the people and say, here's what you said, right? And do you agree, disagree? And then that type of thing. So, yeah, so I think, as a leadership, you want to shape the culture in a certain way. You want to put your stamp on it. But you do have to have input from other people in the organization so they can feel like they had a voice and they shaped it. It's one thing to have some type of statement of culture. And I said that the how-to part is the most difficult. So that's just 20% of the battle, believe it or not. It's not, all right, so how do we get there? That is worthy of a whole bunch of other thinking. But again, that's a participative process.
Once it was defined, did you have any, go-to strategies or things that you found really effective in the
it's hard to
process?
Yeah, it's hard to find a silver bullet, but I would say one thing you have to translate cultural norms into behavioral norms. In other words, so here's the type of behavior that's consistent with this culture, right? And there's the type of behavior that's not consistent. That's important to do. So in real terms, right?
Really define.
People can make it practical, right? And then you need to reward behavior, visibly reward behavior that's consistent with the culture. There's a lot of different ways to reward it. You can just point it out. You can one-on-one. You can do it in groups. You can, pay bonuses. You can performance appraisals. You can, promotion and articles in the company newsletter, whatever it is. You need to promote it, the behaviors, and then you need to also call out behaviors which are not consistent with it. Now that's more tricky, right? Because you don't want to call out people in a group. And make them feel bad, but you got to be able to point out examples of behavior, in particular somebody not exhibiting right behavior. You got to give them feedback, and then by the way, it's not just the person at the top. You have to create a whole organization that is able to give each other feedback. I think the healthiest organization, ones which coach each other, and not be constrained by hierarchy. For example, one thing I try to do is listen, I'm open to feedback. There's mistakes I make. I want to hear from you. If you think I'm not doing something right, if you have feedback that's positive, gee, I love that. But if there's things I should do differently, you let me know, and try to be open to that, not be defensive, and then even ask for it. Ask for some type of feedback. What do you think of this? What I did here? And then, but you want to create an environment where people are coaching each other, right? And regardless of hierarchy, not afraid to coach the boss or peer or like that. And, that's nirvana, but can you get somewhat there? If you can get more, you can get to that point. Then it creates an environment where people are shaping each other, and they're talking about the culture, and they're extolling virtues of good behavior that is consistent with the culture. And it's not just coming from the top, right? It's coming from people within the organization.
Yeah, that's the learning organization you talked about earlier, right there.
Right. Think of it as a community of people. And then what shapes the behaviors of a community of people. It's not just some person at the top saying this is how we gotta behave. People, they create the community in terms of how they work with, interface with each other, how they react with each other.
Well, and I think it's such, you mentioned before about just you as the leader being open to that feedback and soliciting that feedback. I think sets such a powerful example for other people to say, this is how we should be looking at feedback and being open to, new ways of doing things.
It's hard.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm asking feedback to people, very honest, your stomach starts turning, right? And you feel bad, you feel angry, all these, and you have to suppress those feelings, not have the person perceive that you're going through these type of, because that will stifle their feedback, right?
Sure.
So you have to allow yourself say, this is, again, the end result's going to be good, even though it's painful to get there. Listen to the feedback, and be non-judgmental. And you don't have to ultimately agree with the feedback, right? But you have to listen and understand it and validate it. Say, I understand what you're saying. I see why you think that. And not be it's very easy to get defensive, myself included, right? You get defensive, right? Nobody likes to be criticized or comments pointed out that make you feel bad, right? But you have to discipline yourself that it's okay, because what's going to come out of that is going to be much more positive. Right?
Yeah, definitely. And it's that leadership by example, and sets that stage for everybody else to, have those conversations with each other. And if they see, you as the leader being not defensive, even if, you're gritting your teeth a little bit as it's coming through, I think that's certainly a behavior that they pick up on, and probably something that they try to emulate at least more than they would otherwise, when now you have, or somebody else has feedback for them.
Yeah, I think vulnerability is important. To feel, to allow yourself to be vulnerable. For example, something you have to draw the feedback out of people is that I've been thinking about that decision I made a few weeks ago. I don't know if it's the right decision. I may have blown. Here's why maybe not the right decision. What do you think? Well, right away you explain, you position yourself as being vulnerable. That, you're not sure you made the right decision, and this person. It's okay for this person to say something like, "Hey, I agree with you. Maybe it wasn't so good. It's a good decision." But you draw them out a little bit, and that's one example. But there's other examples of have a vulnerability that people are okay and being honest with you, right? That they feel like you're not going to fall apart. I mean, there's different ways to have. Some people are afraid to say people directly. They feel like you fall into a mush, right? And that's just the lead of anybody. And they feel like you react negatively and defensively. But either one is bad, because people don't want to give feedback and feel bad they gave the feedback.
Right.
So you have to be able to create a receptive ear for it and seek it out. And then you have to create that behavior in the organization, that behavior alone in the organization. I remember a situation where we've actually had discussion about what it means to be a coach. How do you become a good coach? How do you perform, be even better coach? And part of it is being vulnerable and listening to feedback and be able to respond to it, or address issues. People have issues or problems, and they'll create an environment where people feel honest about expressing their feelings and be able to address it. Sometimes you address it by saying, "Well, I can see how you feel, but I don't know if that's the right reason, way to feel in this, because this is how I try to guide them to the right answer." Or do we listen to it and say, "Listen, you're right. I need to do something different. I need to be better next time."
Yeah, no, and that vulnerability, I think, creates that level playing field to have that conversation. Dick, I want to be respectful of your time, but before we wrap up, I just wanted to zoom out. Looking at your career, you've done a lot of incredible work at some major organizations. You've built this reputation of somebody that is the go-to person when a company is looking to get turned around, or they're going through a merger. Really like the big inflection points of a company, you seem to be the guy that they pick up the phone and call and say, "Hey, can you come help us?" And we've covered a lot of things that I think make you so effective in that role, from just your strategic prowess to dealing with people and being able to evaluate leadership and culture, your ability to take feedback. You mentioned before, you're kind of that person that maybe sees the waterfall when you're rowing down the river a little bit sooner than everybody else. So there's a lot of moving pieces here, but I wanted to ask you, like, if there was one thing that, somebody listening to this, you would want them to kind of take away from this conversation, maybe something that you felt like set you apart, something you did, something you believed that others didn't, what would that kind of one takeaway be?
Wow. That's a tough question. That's a tough question. What's important is to be true to yourself. And I think it's a very important skill to have, a good view of yourself, your strengths, your weaknesses, your desires, your goals, and what motivates you. Because you can't motivate or lead other people unless you have a good sense of yourself. I think constantly be able to prepare yourself for different leadership situations. You have to have a good sense of yourself and what you're trying to achieve, what motivates you, so that you position yourself for success, and also, play to your strengths and work around your weaknesses. And I've seen a common derailer for people is that they either don't have a good self view of themselves, or if they do, they don't do anything about it. They have weaknesses and they say, well, that's the way I am. They don't develop strategies around the weaknesses. Some weaknesses you can improve, for example. Or they too often focus on the weakness, not on the strengths. So I think that's an important ingredient to being successful in anything you do, not just being a leader in an organization, but I think being a realistic, authentic view of yourself is, and then strategize, well, what do I do with this now? And what motivates me? What excites me? And what doesn't? And so you can best position yourself to be in a situation where you can accomplish what you want to accomplish and play to your strengths, and then work around things that, are not quite in sync with that.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. We opened the conversation with you saying how you were a student of the human condition and human nature. And you can obviously tell that you've taken that to heart and worked on yourself. And, arguably that work has been what enabled you to do everything and figure everything else out. So I think that's a great endpoint to our conversation today.
Being attuned to that also helps you understand other people.
Yeah.
And then not perfect, but you get a better understanding of other people, and then you can coach and mentor them, and also figure out what's the stumbling block. And sometimes, this is not a good job fit, and that you gotta fix it. But, I think that's, again, that intellectual capability to be able to assess yourself also plays into how you can better assess other people, help them.
Yeah, I think years ago, somebody had said that, everybody needs to be a student of human nature, and the first person you need to learn about the human nature of is yourself. If you understand yourself in that regard, then it helps you in understanding everybody else.
Exactly. I don't know if I answered your question or not.
No, I think you nailed it.
There you go.
I think you nailed it.
So, Dick, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom. I think there's just some wonderful, wonderful golden nuggets for everybody listening here today. So thank you so much for your time.
Well, it was fun. It was a very interesting conversation. Thank you for spending time with me. I again, I learned some things from this conversation, so I appreciate that as well. So thanks for the opportunity.
Win-win.
Right.
This episode is brought to you by Mojo. Performance-enhancing services make people faster, smarter, and more effective as human beings. And Mojo is the world's most powerful. With Mojo, you can plan out your next move, tackle your next challenge, and accomplish your next goal. That's why people that use Mojo are in better shape, make more money, and have better relationships. And teams that use Mojo have higher performance, better cultures, and more talented people. So if you want to optimize your performance and well-being in 2022, try out Mojo risk-free at joinmojo.com. That's 14 days absolutely free at joinmojo.com.